prove to the establishment that the concentration camp technique, the reversion to the second dimension of fascism, the terrorist phase, but to prove that this terrorism won't work on us, it won't stop our movement.
This is the BGF oath. Weusi Gaidi Jama, that means Black Guerrilla Family. If I should break my stride or falter at my comrade's side, this oath shall kill me. If my words should prove untrue, should I betray the chosen few, this oath shall kill me. Should I submit to greed or lust, should I betray the people's trust, this oath shall kill me. Should I grow lax in discipline, in time of strife refuse my hand, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand, this oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the guerrillas of Black August. Weusi Gaidi Jama.
Greetings and salutations. It's your host, Gabe Morales, coming back for our final episode on Black Guerrilla family members and associates over the past 6 decades or so. Start off with Luis Bala aka Bato Talamantes, who was a Mexican mafia member, but has been a strong supporter of the Black Guerrilla family even before the day that George Jackson was gunned down on August 21st, 1971. Talamantes was named as one of the inmates who participated in that violent incident, and he was part of the San Quentin Six. I actually have quite a bit of information on Talamantes, but I'm not going to say a lot about him, because he made a few comments about this channel, slamming me several times. And it's obvious he absolutely hates cops. I think I've been more than fair in this series, expressing sentiments of BGF members, even though I often don't agree with them. I also think I've been more than fair in criticism of the California Department of Corrections and corrections in general when it has been abusive, but also have been supportive of the majority of good officers that are working our streets and prisons today. In this picture here, we can see Luis Talamantes in the middle with the George Jackson shirt and David Jap Johnson on his right-hand side and Willie Sundiata Tate on his left. Willie Tate was born in the mid-1940s in Selma, Alabama, where he lived till he was 6 years old. Understand that his father was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. One thing I'll say about military children, and I've met a lot of them, because as you know, I served in the Marine Corps for 4 years, and even after that time period, is often they're subject to strict discipline at home. This can be good in many ways, as it may instill discipline in them as an adult. But I've also seen overbearing parents where the kids went the other way and rebelled against them and against the system. For some reason, I think Tate was one of those. Understand his family moved to El Paso, Texas. However, he did not attend school, as there was no kindergarten or first grade for black children. Texas, even today, is often prejudiced against black people. Understand that his family moved to California and settled in the Fresno area when he was about 8 years old. At the age of 14, he became a runaway and, I understand, committed a crime and was sentenced to up to 10 years in prison. I won't get into the details too much of the San Quentin incident involving George Jackson in August 1971, as you've already heard it several times now. In regards to the death of George Jackson, Tate wrote in a radical newspaper, "In my opinion, Nat Turner and George Jackson are forever linked by events that took place 140 years apart. The day that George was shot in the head by prison officials as he lay wounded on the ground just happened to be the same day that Nat Turner began his insurrection. If Comrade had chosen that day to liberate instead of having it forced upon him by prison officials in their initial attempt to assassinate him, he could not have chosen a better day." Remembering August 21st, 1971, when Comrade George Jackson had his life snuffed out, is painful. To know that prison officials got away with murder on that day and never paid any dues for the crime that they committed against one of our greatest teachers. Let me interject here once again. If I understand him right, like David Johnson, he is stating that CDC officials allowed 3 guards, with 2 other guards almost being killed after having their necks cut, and 2 white terror tenders to be killed just in order to take out George Jackson. Again, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Tate talks about committing crimes and not facing any consequences or repercussions. What about the deaths of these officers and those two tier tenders? I guess their lives don't matter to him. But, like I said, Tate was accused of being one of the participants in that dreadful incident and was put on trial with the San Quentin Six. During the trial, Tate was freed on a $50,000 bail. After 17 months in deliberating for 124 days, the Marin County jury of 5 men and 7 women rendered their verdicts on August 12, 1976, 5 years after the incident. And as stated before, David Johnson was convicted of 1 count of felony assault on a guard. Hugo Pinel received 2 counts of felony assault on guards. And as covered in the last episode, Johnny Spain received 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder, although that was later overturned. After Tate was released from prison in April of 1977, he was critically wounded after being shot by an Earl Satcher, who was leader of a radical ex-convicts group called Tribal Thumb. The theory is that Satcher apparently wanted to kill Tate as part of a forced takeover of the co-op board for his personal financial gain. I find it also interesting that Tate worked for many years for an organization, All of Us or None, and that his email is 1 down, 2 to go at att.net, which is an obvious reference to an alleged note left on the body of C.O. Mills when he was hurled to his death, allegedly by George Jackson, that stated 1 down, 2 to go, as he sought revenge for the deaths of the 3 black prisoners gunned down by O.P. Miller in January of 1970. Was Tracy Tate, CDC number H, as in Henry, 6860. I spoke about him before under the C episode when I talked about fellow inmate Aaron Caslin. Evidently, there was an inmate, Rodney Warren, who was from the BGF stronghold of Oakland, California, and had expressed his desire to leave the BGF while he was at California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. After that, it is said that inmates Tate and Caslin attacked him and tried to take him out. I show that Tracy Tate is not currently in custody. There was a Freddie, a.k.a. Yero Askari Taylor. He was originally out of Oklahoma. Taylor had been incarcerated for the 1985 attempted rape and murder of a Carmen Vasquez in Richmond, California. He then was given the death penalty and sat on San Quentin's death row for many years. When he was considered to be a captain in the BGF, filed numerous appeals, and finally Contra Costa County prosecutors decided against retrying Taylor after he agreed to a plea bargain and pled guilty down to manslaughter. And Taylor was released in the year 2019. It was an Anderson, a.k.a. Mrs. Maji Thurston, who I understand was the key leader of the Black August Organizing Committee in the late 1970s. And it is stated that he was part of the plot to assassinate 3 state leaders on the 10th anniversary of George Jackson's death, which would have been August 21st, 1981. But the plot was thwarted, as described in the Achille episode when I talked about how longtime prison gang expert Sergeant Bill Hankins blew open that case. Fred Salahuddin Tidmore, who I understand was a BGF lieutenant at one time, and is seen here at New Folsom State Prison right after I left the department in early 1993. I understand that prison investigators once found a C card, not a birthday card, but a C card, standing for Crip, where one of his homies stated, "You've been representing the LBC, acronym for Long Beach Crips, for a long time. In fact, you was representing when nobody was, and you are still pushing strong. So I give you my love and respect, and it is my pleasure to say, Happy C-Day, homie." Howard Toll, who is from Watts, CDC number A is an Alpha, 76211. I understand he also was tight with the black Muslims, and was said to be very well read in the Quran. But I'm not sure what happened to him after the 1970s. There was a Joe Lewis, a.k.a. Prophet Okera Valentine, who, as I stated earlier, was a bounty hunter out of Nickerson Gardens. That is a blood set. He also became a very powerful figure within the United Bloodline prison gang, but was also documented by CDC as being BGF. I show that he entered CDC in May of 1982 and was housed at San Quentin in the 1980s, where he was very much involved in penitentiary politics. He then was housed at Pelican Bay for many years and then finally kicked out of the SHU and is currently housed at Centinela State Prison. Was Warren Wells, who was born in San Francisco's Alice Griffith Projects on November 13, 1947. Right away, he had some issues growing up in a predominantly black hood as he was light-skinned with green eyes. I believe he was mixed black and white. I understand that he first went to prison at the age of 16 in 1963 and was sent to Soledad State Prison. Said that when he was at CTF, movers and shakers George Jackson, Eldridge Cleaver, Apprentice Bunchy Carter, Hugo Yogi Pinnell, Fleta Drumgo, James McLean, and others, who later on became powerful Black Panther or Black Guerrilla family players. While out in prison in 1967, Eldridge Cleaver recruited him into the Black Panther Party, and he soon became their sergeant-at-arms. In 1968, he was shot and wounded, along with Eldridge Cleaver, in a firefight between the Black Panthers and the police that killed Bobby Hutton, who some say was murdered in cold blood by Oakland police. He was tried and convicted for that shootout, and in 1969 was sent back to San Quentin prison at the age of 22. Stephen Kamasi Simmons, who was covered in the last episode, was one of the BGF soldiers who spent time with Warren behind the walls, and they both helped draft up the 1970 Folsom Manifesto. I first met Warren Wells in the late 1980s when he worked along with Chip Fitzgerald as an inmate clerk at the C Facility Lieutenant's Office. As I stated previously, that is a key intelligence position to have, so I always thought that was pretty interesting. I'm pretty sure he and Chip were monitoring the comings and goings of prisoners on that yard, and I also remember them hanging around fellow Black Panther Geronimo Pratt, as seen here. June 29, 2001, Wells died in the custody of the California Department of Corrections after spending decades in prison. It was an Edward Eddie Whiteside, who, as a young man, was sentenced to 1 year to life for a second-degree robbery, and in the late 1960s had participated in race riots at Folsom Prison. January 13th of 1970, he was one of the inmates involved in the infamous Soledad shooting, whereby 3 black prisoners were killed. Told you guys before I wouldn't speak too much about the Maryland branch of the BGF, but I will mention a Tavon White. A news article in 2013 stated that there was an indictment against 13 prison guards at the Baltimore City Detention Center who were accused of helping a BGF leader run a drug trafficking and money laundering operation. What is interesting about this case is that evidently Tavon White was quite the ladies' man, and 4 of the female guards that were charged became pregnant by him. During discovery, it was said that White was documented as bragging, "This is my jail. I'm dead serious. I make every final call in this jail. Everything comes to me. I am the law. My word is law." According to his guilty plea, White joined the BGF in the year 2000, shortly after the Maryland branch was formed, allegedly in 1996. Which was the time he was convicted of second-degree murder. Police charged him with another attempted murder in 2009, and he was sent to the Baltimore jail without bail. It stated that at that time, he assumed control of the BGF, even though he wasn't a bushman, or according to their system, a high-ranking BGF member. The article went on to say that White used both sex and money to cement his position in jail, letting some corrections officers drive luxury cars bought with BGF proceeds made in the facility. He later on turned informant and, of course, was not well liked by many, and many state he was not a leader. He just happened to be at the right spot at the right time and was put in charge. There was a Wen Imara Wiggins, who I show was a BGF lieutenant when he had G number 21969. Understand that Wiggins was out of Sacramento and was documented as being a parolee at large in the year 2011. There was a Henry Sugarbill Wilds, who I mentioned before when I talked about the Vanguards, which according to my documentation was a group originally formed by W.L. Nolan at Soledad, and a new faction resurfaced in 1978 at the Dual Vocational Institute that opposed much of the politics and favoritism used by the BGF. In particular, they did not like the severe methods the BGF used to purge its ranks. Several of these vanguards were hardcore Crip gang members who felt the BGF were favoring the Bloods that were just starting to hit the system in large numbers, and they declared war against the BGF at Folsom Prison in 1979. In 1981, it said that the BGF moved against the Vanguard, killing one and injuring several others. Henry Sugar Bear Wiles and Michael Durrell Sr. were identified at that time as being Vanguard leaders. There was a David Chili Red Williams, who was born in 1943 in Oakland, California. It is said that he was very soft-spoken, but was deadly, and had a reputation as being a killer. He ended up joining the black family and often fought alongside George Jackson, Bill Christmas, and other black family members. It is stated that he spent more than a quarter of his life behind bars, being convicted with two crime partners, George Freddie Payne and Lafayette Ziegler, as part of a 1971 shootout, which a prominent black Muslim leader, Ronnie Flanow, was shot to death, and an 8-year-old girl died from a stray bullet. Evidently, the armed conflict started when the slain girl's father, Billy Mapp, created a splinter Muslim group to go against the Nation of Islam and expanded drug sales into Oakland. It said that Chili Red was given 10 years to life and did time at San Quentin's Adjustment Center, Soledad, Folsom, Tracy, and Vacaville. A BGF member named Robert Williams, who was out of Riverside. B number is in Bravo, 41050. Who was committed to DBI in April 1972. He hit San Quentin Yard a couple months later and understand was hit in the chest by Mundo Mendoza in October 1973's Adjustment Center. Another influential BGF member named Ruben Kubwa Jitu Williams, who entered CDC in the 1970s with B number 72882. Then show he is eventually moved to Pelican Bay SHU and remained there through the 1990s. When the SHU kickouts occurred, he was housed at Ironwood State Prison in 2015, but I currently show is not in custody. There was a Terry, a.k.a. Catfish Samaki Williams, who was out of Stockton. He entered CDC in the 1980s under C numbers in Charles, 15281. Then show that he was housed at Pelican Bay for many years, but when the kickouts occurred, was housed at Old Folsom State Prison in the year 2015, but currently shows not in custody. There's Jimmy, a.k.a. Baridi Yero Williamson, who entered CDC in July of 1986 with D numbers in David 34288. I show he was housed at Pelican Bay for many years and was very involved in the SHU hunger strikes. That effort was successful in forcing CDC to reevaluate its classification and gang validation system, and he was kicked out of Salinas Valley State Prison in 2015. I currently show that Jimmy Williamson is housed at Centinela State Prison. And finally, we have Lawrence Old Man Askari Woodard, who re-entered CDC in January 1991 with E numbers in Edward 81171. I'm not sure what happened, but he was said to be involved in the incident where Sergeant Hal Birchfield was speared to death at San Quentin in 1985. During that case, he and other BGF members were charged with conspiracy to murder. It stated that on the night of June 8, 1985, Sergeant Birchfield worked a night shift, which just so happened to be a Saturday night, and was tucking with an inmate around 11 p.m., which would be 2,300 hours. It is stated that inmate Jarvis Masters, who I covered before, had another inmate would call up the world's solid gold as a warning. If you remember, the show Solid Gold was very popular then. When Birchfield began moving from the lower first tier up to the second tier, where inmate Andre Johnson was housed, allegedly waiting with his spear, Birchfield walked and talked along the open bars. It is said that Officer Rick Lipton was working the gun rail and was covering Birchfield as he made his rounds. But due to the poor lighting, that Lipton could only see Birchfield's legs. Thus did not see for sure who speared Birchfield. And, as stated many times before, Old Man Askari Woodard named in the conspiracy plot to murder Sergeant Birchfield. He was housed at Corcoran SHU in the year 2011, then was moved to Tehachapi in 2015. But I currently show is at Wasco State Prison with a sentence of life without parole. And so I have a quick war story to end. I was working New Folsom Prison during my first real major assignment in C1 block. And during feeding, I saw an inmate Johnson with a blue sweatshirt underneath his blue inmate shirt. And as stated before, colors were not allowed at New Folsom Prison. And not wanting to cause a major scene, I called up Johnson's table, which consisted of 4 inmates. And as the C1 dining room door closed, I told Johnson to stay back while I ordered the other 3 to return to their cells. It was at that time I confronted Johnson about his sweatshirt, and he got very lippy with me, and I thought maybe we might fight right there. However, he finally handed it over after I told him it would be put back on his property. Inmate Johnson then was written up for insubordination in unauthorized property. He ended up going to his hearing, and I actually thought probably the attempted assault charge might be dropped because we did not make physical contact. However, he threatened to assault me and told me that I was just messing with him, among other four-letter words, when I took the sweatshirt. He ended up going to his hearing a few days later and was escorted back into C1 by two officers that had worked at San Quentin when Birchfield was killed. Apparently, inmate Johnson was also there in the same unit when Birchfield was killed, and so all three knew each other. I'm not sure what happened along the way, but as soon as Johnson got inside the unit, he took a hold of one of the officers in a chokehold, and this officer was turning colors. I later learned that Johnson was said to be a martial arts expert, and the way he had this officer, he used him as a human shield from the control officer who also was a gunner. I could not hit him with my baton without hitting the officer. Finally, I came down with a crashing blow on his neck bone with my side-handled baton, and he let go of the officer, ended up doing a timber, hitting the section unit steel door on the edge and busting his head open. It looked to me like he was then unconscious and bleeding, but the officer who he had assaulted and possibly could have killed by choking him to death ended up jumping on him and started pounding him in the face, even though he looked to me like he had already passed out. I grabbed the officer off him. I then went on my days off, and when I came back, they told me that Johnson was in a coma and may not make it. I thought, oh, great. Now I'm going to go up for murder of prisoner charge. And like I said, I had barely just started. This was maybe 6 months out of the academy. So I was feeling bad for the inmate, but also concerned about my own future. Thinking back on it now, and sometimes hearing how officers get into situations that I know can escalate very rapidly, I know reactions don't always happen perfectly, and a lot of people criticize them later when they might have done the same thing if put in that position. It is often said that corrections is a job that not many want to do or can do, and I agree. A couple of years later, I was working on the yard, and I saw an inmate on crutches make a beeline for me. As he came across the yard, I thought I recognized him, but it didn't dawn on me that this was Johnson until he got right up to me and then stuck out his hand. To be honest, I thought he might shank me right there as revenge, but he shook my hand and said, "No hard feelings, Mr. Morales. You did what you had to do. I'm not going to be any problem for you here," which I made a big sigh of relief. I then noticed that he only had one leg, and I said, "What happened?" He goes, "Well, after that incident, I was sent to Corcoran's Shoe, and I got in a fight with my cellie, and I didn't stop, and the gunner opened up the door and shot my leg off. I've learned my lesson now, and I'm Christian." I said, "Wow, that's a hard lesson to learn." And he said, "Yeah, I know," and kind of smiled, and then went on his merry way. That's just one of many true Folsom war stories that are in my book, The Life and Times of a Vato Loco. You also might want to check out my book, The History of the Black Gorilla Family. That includes more stories and more details. And so, that ends our series on the Black Gorilla Family. I hope you learned something new and continue watching and supporting this channel. I'm going to take a little break for the rest of July and then come back sometime in August with some new episodes, both street gangs and prison gangs, as well as do some interviews with some interesting individuals. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.
Should I go lax and discipline? In time of strife, refuse my hands, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand? This oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the gorillas of Black August. Boy, Usi Gaidi Jama.